Adams, Snap Plastics, UPC, and Lifelike. I'm doing these four together because they're so interrelated. Adams was an early plastic scale modeling company started by Steve Adams, who owned a tool and die company in New Jersey. Adams and his three sons had been investors in Revell Models. In 1955, they agreed to make molds of Tony Ballone's sculpted figures for Revell, but for business reasons, the operation was set up under a different company called Miniature Masterpieces. But for all practical purposes, it was a division of Revell. Despite the excellent quality of the figures, the Miniature Masterpieces did not prove very popular, so Revell eventually dropped the line. This is where Adams got into the plastic kit model business on their own, sort of. Adams still owned the Miniature Masterpieces molds and decided to try and sell them under their own name brand. But they had seen that model builders preferred modern subjects, so they cut new molds of their own for a new kit, and in 1955, Adams released a 1:40 scale model of the 155mm Long Tom cannon and tractor. This kit was so good that Revell used it in their Army Combat Team set in 1956. This made perfect sense as Revell already had a 1:40 scale kit of a Sherman tank and a 1:40 scale kit of a Jeep. Plus, Revell and Adams already had an established relationship. In 1957, Adams added a 1:40 scale Honest John missile, and in 1958 they added 10 more kits, mostly in 1:40 scale, but also a 1:87 scale Thor missile and a 1:80 scale Vanguard rocket. These are now very rare and very sought after kits. They offered two different sets which were made up of their other kits and a re-release of the Miniature Masterpieces covered wagon, as well as a 1:457 scale model ship, the nuclear-powered commercial ship NS Savannah. Additionally, they offered a rather odd outlier, a 1:40 scale model of the balloon from the 1956 film Around the World in 80 Days. One of the kit I need to mention is their one and only helicopter kit, the simultaneously fictitious yet apparently excellent missile transporter kit. I doubt I need to explain this, but the Cessna CH-1 Skyhook helicopter was a real helicopter, and by most accounts a pretty good one, but it could not lift two very heavy Hawk missiles, and certainly not with them mounted so far after the center of gravity. I have no idea how they dreamed up this particular layout, but my best guess is that they wanted something that would make the helicopter model stand out, and since they already had the 1:40 scale Hawk missiles in production, why not just add them to the kit? Someone probably just thought it looked good and would help with the marketing, and it does have a certain Johnny Quest vibe to it, but it never existed in real life. That being said, I have to admit, I want one. Adams did make its own boxes with artwork by Scotty Edison, who was famous for his artwork with Revell. In 1959, they offered their last 5 kits, an additional 4 of the old Miniature Masterpiece kits, and their only model airplane, a 1:48 scale Saab Draken jet. But regrettably in 1959, Adams and Revell parted ways. I have not been able to determine what the cause was, but it is likely that without Revell's assistance, Adams may not have been viable on their own. Revell would go on to market a 1:32 scale Hawk missile that people often confuse with the Adams kit, but in fact it was made on the old Renwall molds, not Adams. The Adams kits have been available under a number of labels, including Snap, UPC, Lifelike Hobby Kits, and Glencoe. Glencoe is hoping to put the missiles back into production at some point. That brings us to Snap Plastics, which was another New Jersey-based company. They sold the Adams kits under their own brand for about 2 years. I could find little information on this company, but I am reasonably certain that they only leased the molds, as the Adams company was a family-owned business and they did not want to sell their molds. They were, however, willing to lease them. These were handcrafted molds and are still regarded as works of industrial art. UPC. Next to use the Adams molds was the Universal Powermaster Corporation of Pennsylvania. UPC was primarily a reboxer of other companies' kits from 1959 to 1973. The first 2 models I could find were solid model boats. The hydroplane, I believe, was originally from a company called Cavacraft. UPC started reboxing plastic model kits in 1959, but the only business registration I could find for them was filed in 1962, but there may have been a relocation or a refiling. Companies often reinvent themselves, which requires filing for a new business entity. Most of their kits came from Marusan, which was one of the first Japanese plastic kit model makers. Others were the Adams molds. They also did Nippon Hobby, Frog, Revell, Bondi, Hasegawa, and many more. Although best known for importing and reselling mainly Japanese kits in the USA, in the 1960s and 70s some of the UPC kits found their way to Europe, probably imported by Ricoh. In 1973, UPC got out of the kit model business. This brings us to Lifelike hobby kits. Lifelike was a model company that was into many things, including model trains and scenery. In fact, that's how they got started. But they were also into kit models between 1969 and 1976. In 1971, they acquired some of Pyro's molds and then some of the Adams molds as well. They also obtained molds from other companies. Throughout the 1970s, they would add dozens of Pyro's old kits, many of them originally from Impact or Palmer, or sometimes other companies. The last reissue of a Lifelike kit was in 1976 with Pyro's old T-Rex and Stegosaurus dinosaur kits. They appear to have gotten out of kit models at this point and refocused on trains until the family sold the entire business in 2008. And finally, that brings us to Glencoe. Glencoe now has some of the remaining Adams molds, and I spoke to Nick Argento at Glencoe. Hopefully, after the lockdown, they can get that Thor missile and the Vanguard rocket back in production because I intend to get a couple of each. My conversation with him and his generous allocation of his valuable time to answer my questions is greatly appreciated. We may even arrange a podcast at some point, or at least an interview. Well, that's all I'm going to go into for Glencoe because I hope to do a video about them by themselves, especially after speaking more with Nick. I want to thank everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
Well, grab your gun and grab your gear. We're on the double, march to the rear. We're moving on. We're moving on. MacArthur's men move back again. We're moving on. Old Sigmund Rhee was setting his soul, saying, "Come on, boys, we gotta bury our gold." We're moving on. We're moving on. We're moving on to old Chung Shon. We're moving on. Well, we gave him shot and we gave him shell and we drove him north of Parallel. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're on the run to hell and gone. We're moving on. Holy smoke, they're coming down the pass, spraying a burp gun right at my ass. I'm moving on. I'm moving on. This little GI is flying high. I'm moving on. Hey, here comes Joe Son down the track. GI baby strapped on her back. She's moving on. She's moving on. She's looking for Papa Son. We are moving on. What's the matter? You mad at me? All 'cause I give you VD. We're moving on. We're moving on. Her little honey bucket in the middle of the road. She's moving on. So when you hear the patter of a tiny feet, that's the U.S. Army in a full retreat. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're burning gas. We're hauling ass. We're moving on.